Good evening. It is Monday, July 20th. This is a special meeting of the Board of Education in Guilford, Connecticut. We are holding this special meeting in order to get updates from Dr. Freeman and our administration, both on a COVID-19 response, including plans for school in the fall, and a calendar update as well. So I'm going to turn it right over to Dr. Freeman.
Thank you very much, Dr. Balistraci. So I do want to first bring the board up to speed once again on the plans for designing the reopening. We spoke at some length last week about the timelines and about the work that was going into putting the plan together. I want to start this evening by updating the board and the community about some of the survey results that we have received. In the last few weeks, we have put out surveys to the parent community asking both about their thoughts at this moment in time about having their students return to schools in the fall and about their intention of whether or not their students would be riding the bus. Similarly, we have surveyed our certified staff. This is really just the teacher and administrative staff at this point to get a sense of their intentions to be able to return to school in the fall. I want to be clear that this is simply a wet finger in the wind at this point. These are not commitments that we are asking from parents. We understand that in one sense, the opening of school is still a long way off, that many things can change, and the same applies to a certain degree to the staff members. But at this time, in response to those questions that we asked about a week ago, in response to whether or not you intend at this time to have your students return to school, under the condition that at this moment we're still planning, which would be a full reopening of full school days with health and safety conditions in place to mitigate any spread. Things like required mask wearing, social distancing to the degree possible, and cohorting of students in grades K through 8, as well as increased focus and attention paid to hand hygiene and an increased building cleaning regimen. In response to that question, 65% of the parents who responded said that they would plan at this time to return their children to school 5 days a week under those conditions. 11% of the students responded no, that they would not be comfortable and would not plan on returning their students to school under those conditions. And 24% responded that they're simply unsure at this time. Now we'll be releasing much more information as our opening plan is more fully developed, but that was the response at the moment in time. And the survey results stayed open until this weekend. We were still receiving responses through the weekend. In response to whether or not parents intended to have their students ride the school bus next year, we also received response. And remember, at this time, we are in fact encouraging students, parents in Guilford, that if they have the opportunity and the capacity to drive their students to school next year. In response to that question, 37% of the respondents said that they would expect to have their students riding the school bus next year. 38% said that they would not expect to have their children riding the school bus next year, and 25% were unsure. I don't know at this time, I don't have available to us what our ridership was last year. I know that this is a decrease in ridership. We did not have 100% ridership last year, but I would estimate that an aggregate figure was probably in the ballpark of 70%. And obviously 37% is a significant decline from that number. When we spoke to our staff members and asked staff members if they thought that they would have a medical or otherwise precluding condition from returning to work next year, we had 42% of our staff members who expressed concern and said that they might have a family condition or medical condition or other condition that could keep them from being able to return to work. At this point, we will begin asking individual staff, and again, we have to pull the other employee groups. At this time, we've only spoken with the certified groups. But at this time, we'll need to do more specific work with those groups to ask what are the concerns and go through the HR steps that would be required to identify. I don't think that as we move forward, the number will stay that high, but we will need to begin moving forward and planning around all of those numbers. I think it's probably prudent to maybe pause there. I also want to give the board and the community more of a sense of what shape our plan is taking moving forward, but I thought I'd stop there and see if any board members had questions about the questions we asked or the information that we got back in response to those survey questions.
Paul, a quick question. Was you able to break down the survey in terms of students returning if they were elementary, middle, or high school? Was there any sway one way or the other?
We are looking into that now. I don't have those figures with me
Okay.
tonight, but we have the ability to look deeper. We do have the ability to disaggregate and look at what grade levels are more specifically impacted. I think my initial look was that those numbers are higher at the earlier grades than they are at the older grades.
I'm sorry, a clarification, higher, more apt to return in the earlier grades, or?
No, I'm sorry, more apt to be holding students at home in the
Okay.
younger grades than they are in the
Okay.
older grades, but we haven't specifically broken it out by all 13 grade levels at this time, although we're working on that.
Thank you.
I would guess that some of the question about this, whether your kid would ride the bus, could change if people knew what the school week is going to look like. So if people have, you know what I mean, that could change dramatically if people are making, you know, childcare plans and work plans that, you know, someone who thinks they can drive their kid may not be able to, or vice versa.
Exactly right. I think that that may be different if we are fully open compared to if we're in a hybrid setting where the week may be split. And I will go into some detail about what those will look like as we keep moving forward. And then the other thing is that we've really looked at legal opinions. And while it is helpful to know that we will have decreased ridership, we still, you know, again, if a family thinks that they plan on driving their child in September, but in November, their situation changes, the routes still need to cover the whole community, and parents may access the bus at any time. A parent who responds that they don't plan on riding the bus is not giving up the right or the opportunity to ride the bus if they later find out that their child needs that service or would benefit from riding the bus. So we met, Mr. Bowden and I met earlier today with representatives from specialty as well as with Mr. Dorwin, and we're working on plans for transportation. And remember, I did note that I think I mentioned last week, it's worth repeating here if I didn't, certainly worth saying if I didn't mention last week, that we're also looking at drop off and pickup, arrival and dismissal procedures around the bus as well. We will be working to make sure that students are still maintaining social distancing to the degree possible, and that cohorting is in place as soon as students arrive at school and when they're being dismissed from school. So this does mean that arrival and dismissal procedures will take some more time and will infringe a little bit on instructional time. We will not be moving all of the students to a large area for dismissal. We'll be calling students from classrooms so that they're walking through the halls in small cohorted groups, not in large mixed groups. And that will have an impact on some instructional minutes at the beginning and the end of each day.
And is specialty doing any kind of internal polling to determine whether or not they're going to have staffing issues?
I believe they are, but we haven't seen the results of that at this point. And quite honestly, what we talked about this morning was about the need to likely have monitors, if not on all buses, at least on many buses, and if not for all of the year, at least for a portion of the year. We will need students, we believe, are going to need assistance making sure that they're masked, that they keep their masks on. There are now loading procedures and unloading procedures that will be different than what students are used to, and attempting to maintain as much social distancing space as available on any given bus. So we are talking about you know, in addition to holding on to the drivers and bringing the drivers back and being fully staffed, the need to add monitors, and that we anticipate there may be a challenge in finding people who are interested in taking those monitoring positions next year.
Paul, I had a
Dr.
question. Oh, I'm sorry. I had
Oh,
a
go ahead.
question about the teachers, the 42%, first of all, is that a surprise to you hearing that number? Is that something you were waiting for? And then can you give us some kind of sense of what kind of numbers are you looking for to come back that you need sort of as a minimum staffing for in-person schooling, like what we're trying, the first option that we're trying to achieve here?
So no, it was not a surprise. I think we're hearing concerns like this that are being expressed across the state and in fact nationally from teachers who have questions or concerns about returning to school. Additionally, we asked staff to respond on what was only a very high level description of what school would look like. They, like you and like the public, most of them have not seen a complete detailed plan yet. And as I'm going to point out, even the plan that we're bringing to closure this week is only a district plan. And so in fact, the specific details for each individual school are still yet to be clarified. So I think that people are responding cautiously, probably conservatively at this time until we're able to explain in greater detail what the plans entail and what our health and safety mitigation strategies will specifically look like. Additionally, we asked a very broad question, and we asked if there were any conditions like childcare, like transportation, like a health concern that could, or like elder care or family care that could impact your ability to return. So it was very much phrased in the broadest sense. I do expect that that number will shrink over time as the plans become more detailed, as people become more confident or more comfortable, and as the HR office has an opportunity to speak to each individual about their individual circumstances to talk about which conditions are in fact qualifying and which may not be qualifying. All of that said, we are scheduling for full staffing. And so to any degree that we have staff members who cannot return, we will be looking to try to cover with substitutes, with long-term substitutes. We will be looking to try to find creative opportunities for staff members to be able to support from at home. But as the plan takes more shape, it appears that those opportunities may be limited. And when we talk about the plans, I'll jump right in to explain what our basic instructional strategy appears to, it will likely be, and it becomes clear that it becomes difficult for staff members to stay at home full time and be able to support students from an at-home setting if we're going to be open full time in the fall.
One other question, Paul. I've read that in certain areas like California and Texas, where admittedly the virus is much more active than it is here, the teachers union has opposed at a state level the opening of schools.
My understanding today is that in Florida that a lawsuit has been filed in opposition to the full opening of the schools. So yes, there are conversations that are happening at a state level, and then there are conversations that are happening in other states, and there's a national conversation. There was more medical information that was released this weekend that received a lot of attention about how the virus either impacts or may be carried by school-age students. There's a lot going on. It is my understanding that there are conversations continuing at the state level about possibly changing the expectations around masks for students based on grade level, age of students in the schools. So as I said last week, I will continue to do this week, that the plan that we are going to discuss this week and that we hope to be able to have in a finalized version in front of all of you next week, will not be in a finalized version. That plan will continue to evolve and change. We think that we know where we stand on masks today, but that could change for some portion of our student population tomorrow or Wednesday. And the plan is due to the state on Friday, and we plan to be able to share it with you and this full community on Monday. And this plan is only the district level plan. Right, again, in each building, there will be variations of this plan. I mean, essentially what we're working on this week is one plan with 3 different options that's going to turn into 21 plans as the 3 options get detailed out for each of the 7 buildings. And I think there will be continued discussions at the federal level. There will be continued discussions at the state level. Remember, I did mention to all of you that once our plan is finalized, we then have 6 bargaining units and unaffiliated employees, and we need to discuss with all of them the impact that this plan has on working conditions. And there may be formal negotiations that need to be engaged in if it's determined that this plan substantially impacts those working conditions. And so we're far from finished. Even though we're beginning to come to the conclusion of this first draft, and I'll use graduation as an example. We designed a plan for graduation and released it, and then we heard feedback and input from the community, and it was good and valuable feedback and input, and we revised our plan based on that. So we fully expect that the conditions and expectations upon which we're designing this plan will change. We fully expect that our community is going to have opinions about this plan that we share, and we expect as we start to dig into it at every building level, there will be changes that occur as we move forward.
One of the things I have been receiving not only emails from the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education, CABE, hopefully all of you are receiving those as well. If not, please let me know. They have been doing a number of webinars on school reopening, which I am finding extremely helpful. You know, so we know, right, that the state put out their Adapt, Advance, and Achieve plan on June 29th. CABE first held a webinar on June 30th. I believe they're holding another kind of reopening webinar tomorrow at 11. But there we go. One of the things, and if you haven't had a chance to read it, it's
on our website.
It's 50 pages, right? It's on our website. But it also, you know, one of the things that, just I guess to echo what Dr. Freeman was just saying, CABE has reminded us every step of the way in these webinars and communications is that flexibility is going to be the key here. And you know, I think boards of education across the state right now and school administrators are really kind of grappling with what is required thus far in the plan and where there is guidance, right? So just to level set for any of the community that's watching now who didn't have the opportunity to watch last Monday, there are requirements and guidance around in-school activities such as cohorting, which Dr. Freeman mentioned, mask wearing, et cetera. There is no requirement for social distancing on buses. There's a mask requirement, but there's no requirement for social distancing. Hence our conversations about this last week and this evening. But I continue to check in with CABE and certainly encourage others if you have opportunities to do that. And to board members, let me know if you're not hearing about those opportunities, because I can make sure to forward those.
So I'm happy to go ahead and overview the shape that the plan is taking. Again, last week we spoke a lot about the process through which we were pulling these plans together. And we talked about the time frame that we were working toward, namely that this overview plan is due to the state at the end of this week by the close of business on Friday. It is our intention then to bring the plan to you as a board on Monday evening, where we can discuss it in detail in front of the community. And then it's my intention next Tuesday evening to host a sort of a town hall where I will open up a Zoom meeting for the community members, and I will respond to questions that they pose to me through the Q&A function, and I'll be able to respond to questions about the plan specifically. The plan is essentially our district response to the 50 pages of that Adapt, Advance, and Achieve. It is written at the district level. It is not specific to any one of our 7 schools, and it is responsive to 3 different conditions that the state is asking us to respond to. One would be the full reopening of schools. The definition of that is that in Guilford, we will be opening all of our schools 5 days a week for the full school day, and all of our students are invited and in fact encouraged to return for in-person schooling. Now, we do recognize, again, that some parents, 11% have told us that they will not be ready in September to send their students back. And so the expectation is that we will have a form of support in place that will look very similar to the distance learning that was in place from March to June this past quarter. So that would be the full opening scenario, and we are designing to that. The second scenario is that we design for a reduced capacity, or what the state is calling a hybrid, and that would essentially be schools opening, but opening to limited capacity. We would only have 60 or 50% of the student population in the buildings at any one time. And we would rotate students through a rotating schedule of some design so that we were essentially reducing the population in the building. On any given day, at the high school, we would not have 1,200 students in attendance. We would have 600 students in attendance, giving them the opportunity for more social distance, to spread out, and to be in a less congested, therefore a safer environment. The 50% of the students who were not in school would again be supported by a distance learning structure. And then the third design would be a full return to distance learning, where the schools were closed to student attendance, but instruction was continuing virtually through the distance platforms that we brought up and adopted again in this last quarter, this most recent March to fall. The foundation of the plan that we are building, and I do believe that the parent response that we've received is supportive of this, but the idea pedagogically, the instructional strategy that we are adopting is one of blended instruction, blended learning that will be flexible across all three models, and therefore involve the least disruption if or when we end up needing to shift from one model to another. What that means essentially is that we will build schedules and class assignments at all three levels in the way that we have always built them. A grade level teacher at the elementary school will receive a roster of students. And right now we're projecting class sizes at the elementary that average 17 students per teacher from grades pre-K through 4. At the middle levels, we will be creating interdisciplinary teams of students who are shared by their teachers, and they will have a schedule of classes. And at the high school, we will be assigning students into 5 or 6 or 7 courses with teachers who are assigned to those courses. Our parent response tells us that somewhere between 10 and 35% of the population may not be returning to school on the first day when we open our doors in this coming September. So if you are a classroom teacher with 20 students assigned to you, you could assume that from 2 to 6 of those students will not be in attendance in the classroom, but you will be continuing to support their learning at home through a combination of live streaming, some of the opportunities in your classroom that afford themselves to live streaming. Most often, those will be the direct instructional portions of the class. You can think about the time where the teacher might be in the front of the room at the smartboard doing direct content instruction. Those would be opportunities that the students would be able to log on to a Google Meet or a Zoom meeting at home and still participate in that classroom dialogue or instructional opportunity as the teacher is giving that direct instruction. We would not be expecting any elementary student to simply turn on her computer at 9 o'clock in the morning and sit in front of a live stream feed from 9 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. The students would be logging in for the portions of the class that were appropriate, and then would be continuing with independent or project-based or distance learning structures more similar to what we engaged in from March to June, in the times where the teacher might not be giving that kind of direct instruction, but in fact was circulating among the students who were present in person with her in the classroom. And the same would happen at the high school. If a high school student has an English class, or a high school teacher has an English class with 20 students enrolled, that teacher would be following that same sort of structure. For the full opening, while we expect to have some portion of the population that does not attend, for the population that does attend, we are looking at separating the entrances to the buildings to the degree possible, so that students who are being dropped off by parents might be entering from a different entrance to the building rather than the students who were in fact riding the school buses. Physically, around many of our buildings, we will be doing things similar to what we all witnessed in supermarkets during these past several months. Wherever possible, hallways or stairwells will become one way so that students do not have an opportunity to bump into other students moving in another direction. Traffic will flow in one direction through most of the spaces. Masks will be a requirement. Students at this moment in time, all students, regardless of age or grade level, will be required to wear masks in the buildings. Adults in the buildings will be required to wear masks. We will be dramatically reducing our open door policies around visitors or guests or volunteers in the schools so that we limit the number of outsiders who are coming into the building. Teachers will be required to wear masks during the school day, unless during one of those direct instructional periods that I just mentioned, they can assure that they are removed at least 6 feet from the students, and then the teacher might be able to remove his or her mask for that instructional portion. One, to make it easier while raising your voice and projecting to an audience of folks listening to you, but two, and importantly, so students can see their teacher's face while that instruction is going on, because there's nonverbal communication that's occurring, and that is impacted when a speaker is wearing a mask. Social distancing will occur to the degree possible. The state plan is very clear that there are no specific guidelines around social distancing. We will not, I want to be really clear about this, we will not be able to maintain 6-foot spacing regularly in our classrooms with the class sizes that we expect to return. And we're not mandated to do that. We will be making social distancing a value, and we will be working towards that value in all ways. In every building, we will be removing unnecessary furniture from the classrooms so that student seating areas can be distributed as widely as possible. Specifically, one of the things that we will be doing is that we will be changing passing time in most buildings. At the elementary and middle grades, rather than the students getting up and moving from English class to math class, the teachers will be moving from English class to math class. So in a building like Adams, rather than putting 540 students into the hallways every 50 minutes to move from area to area, it will be more like 60 teachers who go into the hallways to move from area to area. This also builds on the idea of cohorting. Students will be coming to school, and for the most part, reporting to one space with one group of students and remaining in those spaces with those students for most of the school day. Now, while that will have an impact, obviously, on social opportunity and on movement, it does have the benefit of reducing the number of student interactions. And so if there is a concern or an identified case of COVID in our schools, it will make contact tracing much easier. The plans are really built on those 3 foundations: masks, the value of social distancing, and the idea of cohorting. At the high school specifically, cohorting is very challenging, and the state plan does not require cohorting at the high school. We, however, are making every effort we can to make sure that we're working to reduce class size at the high school so that we can maximize the social distancing opportunities. The items that I mentioned about one-way hallways, one-way stairwells, all of those will continue to be in place at the high school. Opportunities around passing time are difficult, but we are possibly looking into schedule changes, which would reduce the number of passing times that occur during the day. And we're making changes to reduce class size. And I want to be clear, I know while that sounds like an immediate good and people are going to think that that is great news, there are compromises that are going into reducing class sizes. Most specifically, we're looking at our catalog of offerings, and we will be making some very difficult choices about limiting the offerings so that we have fewer discrete classes, but more sections of the general required baseline courses, therefore keeping class sizes smaller. A specific example, we have had a very popular course in the past in the social studies department about comparative religions. We will not be offering a comparative religions elective this year. And by not offering that elective, we will be able to add an additional section of our basic freshman or sophomore required history course, therefore reducing the size of that required course. We will be making some difficult decisions around some of our AP offerings. We may be putting caps on AP offerings. And in the past, where we at times have offered 2 or 3 sections of a very popular AP course, we may not be able to make that additional offering. Just today, I did authorize additional FTEs to the high school so that it is not all coming out of student experience. We will put more staffing towards the high school to try to work to bring those class sizes down as well. But remember, we still have a budget that's been approved, and we still have costs associated with all of the other conditions like increased custodial staffing and cleaning supplies and PPE. So the best analogy that I heard from a colleague was that we will be making some very difficult decisions this year in our school system so that we can come back stronger when we have an opportunity to return. He compared it to pruning a really beloved tree in your backyard. When the arborist comes and takes that saw to your tree, you are brokenhearted in this. The tree looks like it has been mutilated after that first happens, but the tree is healthier in the long run because of the changes, and it does bloom again in future years. We're going to be making some difficult decisions. Keeping students in one classroom for most or all of the school day is a difficult decision to make. Reducing popular offerings at our high school, even for the short term, is a difficult decision to make. But it is the right thing to do if it will keep our students healthy and if it will make our schools safe and allow us to continue with some portion of in-school learning this year rather than needing to stay in a completely distant structure. So while we open fully, our schools will be opening with masks and with some of these compromises so that we may open our schools. The second plan is the plan for the hybrid, the reduced enrollment. The idea there is that should we have to close the schools by 50% or reduce our capacity to 50%, every one of those classroom assignments and relationships that I just spoke of will now be reduced to only 50% capacity. So a grade level teacher at the elementary school who was assigned a group of 20 students, instead of having 2 to 6 of those students who don't come in, the class would immediately be reduced into 2 halves. On Monday and Tuesday, 10 of her students would report to school, be present with her physically for in-person schooling, while the other 10 were at home, again, being supported through distance learning techniques or through live streaming. The second cohort, the second group, would report to school on Thursdays and Fridays and would then receive their 2 days of in-school instruction on Thursday and Friday. Wednesday would remain a day of distance learning and support for all students in the district, as well as being a day where deep cleaning occurs in all of the buildings in between the 2 cohorts that we have created. And then again, on the weekends, the buildings would be addressed with deep cleaning. All of the other safety conditions that I talked about in school would continue. Masking would continue, cohorting would continue, one direction hallways would continue. This would additionally give us the ability, however, to dramatically increase the social distancing. If the high school is supporting 600 students in a day rather than 1,200 students in a day, if a classroom is supporting a class group of 9 instead of 18, we're going to double the spaces that we can provide to all of those students who are in all of those settings. I'm particularly pleased that when we looked at the schedule, there's a number of different schedules that people are looking at around cohorting. Some places are looking at doing an every other day rotation. Group A comes in today and group B comes in tomorrow, and then group A comes. So some students have 3 days of contact in a week while other students have 2 days of contact in a week. Some school districts are looking at solid week blocks where cohort A comes in for a full week and cohort B comes in for a second week. What I like about our schedule is that we have talked to shoreline districts from Guilford to Stonington and as far north as Haddam. And many of the superintendents in that Learn area have all agreed to work on the Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday schedule, which will help us by affording some consistency for families who may live in Guilford and whose children attend Guilford schools, but they're actually teachers or employees in other school districts down the shoreline. So the idea of creating the schedule that could be regional will be an enormous benefit to our families and employees. I know that I've shared with you that one year in my family, we had 3 different April vacations that were occurring because we had students in 3 different school districts. We want to avoid as much as possible putting our parents in those situations. Again, the idea of focusing on that strategy of blended learning would in fact allow us to go in and out of a full opening setting and a hybrid setting even multiple times if we needed to over the school year, rather than creating a virtual strand and an in-person strand and then having to adjust those if we reduced our population from 90% to 50%. The structure that I described to you that would be the foundation of our plan would allow any individual teacher to seamlessly go from full schooling to hybrid 50% schooling and continue supporting your grade book of students. It's just shifting your focus. And then if you go all the way to closing, a full distance learning structure, which is the third component, again, you're still supporting those same students. You're just shifting that focus. Again, I think now's a good time for me to take a breath and to pause and answer, I'm sure, questions that are coming up.
Paul, I had a question that has come up a lot in the community, and I'm personally interested in as well. And I know you talked about this briefly about possibly having, tents at each school building. What's the realistic opportunity for creating outdoor learning spaces? Or is this something, that have you considered? Are you looking at what other districts are doing? Because I know a lot of folks in the community are talking about it and asking if that's a possibility.
It is a possibility. It is something that we're looking into, and we've already started conversations with the local fire marshal, but the opportunity is limited. We're really hoping to be able to put possibly a tented facility at each of the buildings, but probably not multiple tents at multiple buildings. Those tents will likely be taken up pretty immediately by PE courses and by mask breaks, right? The Connecticut plan does expect that we will provide students with regular breaks, with opportunities to take the masks off during the school day. In my mind, that needs to be in an outdoor setting, that's an opportunity for a teacher to take a walk with her classroom, go to an outside area, allow the students to space themselves properly, and then remove their masks for a period of time. So as we move to inclement weather, those opportunities are going to need to occur. So I don't know I know a lot of people are asking me about creating multiple outdoor classrooms at every building. That's going to be challenging. And we're currently, all fire codes continue to be in place in the state right now. So I know that there are conversations happening at the municipal level and at the state level asking for some waivers or some latitude from all of the fire codes right now. But currently those codes are all still in place. And so any outdoor tented area, we were looking about the idea of being able to light and heat some of those areas so that we could use them even into the inclement weather. And those are going to be challenges to be able to find those, set those up in appropriate places, light those, heat those, and make them compatible with all current codes in all locations. We're currently focused on creating an opportunity at the high school that would allow us to extend the cafeteria and create a larger cafeteria. I failed to mention this, but a part of the cohorting that we're thinking of is probably lunch being served in classrooms, not in cafeterias, K through 8. This will impact our lunch service. This will impact, it'll definitely impact any profit that we had not projected for the food service this year. Likely, we will be providing brown bag lunches that are delivered to classrooms. We will not have the opportunity to afford salad bars or a la carte options or multiple choices during the lunch waves. High school, that's probably going to be unfeasible. So we're looking at the time of the opportunity of trying to increase the size of the cafeteria, spread the tables out more broadly, and do that by creating a temporary building probably on the west patio. And again, that's going to involve a lot of negotiation with the fire officials in town to make that safe and to make that code compliant with all the current code.
Paul, we're facing two competing agendas. One is how to optimize safety, reduce the risk in terms of health, which is the social distance issue, and how do you optimize learning in the given time. They are not compatible. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having these conversations. As I understand it, the state at the moment is requiring that we meet the state guidelines for X number of days of instruction, minus 3 days now than before.
Yes.
Now, I'm suggesting that probably is a constraint that needs to really, the state really needs to look at, because it doesn't afford as much flexibility as we're going to need in any case, because it's quite possible, and people around the country are doing this, you could end up reducing your actual instruction time by, say, a quarter, and maintain and do it in a way through more intensive and efficient and other kinds of instruction where you could get the same learning outcomes. I mean, nobody might want to admit that, because what are we doing in normal times? But there are things that we can do that are quite inventive that would allow us to spend less time in formal instruction in buildings, that would give us the chance then to increase the social distancing and relieve the pressure on us in terms of numbers. So what I'm trying to figure out is, to what degree will the state allow any district, much less ours, to be inventive about getting the same learning outcomes, but doing it in a way that is not inhibited by this fixed issue of time, which we all know, okay, is not the way in which one should worry about instruction. Time should vary, among other things. Outcomes should be held constant. So if our teachers and our administrators came up with wonderful ways of increasing the efficiency and the quality of learning, because we need to be inventive and because we know how to do that, how much leeway will you as a system head get ultimately? Because it sounds like that would make a big difference in our ability to plan, particularly at the hybrid and the full enrollment issue.
At this moment in time, the answer to that is none. That question has been asked, and at this moment in time, the state is still requiring that school districts offer. You're correct. In our second item, I'm going to tell you that it's no longer 180 days, that for this coming year, it's 177 days. But the state is requiring that we offer 177 full days of in-person instruction, and that to do less than that would not meet the statute, the mandate at this time. It is my understanding that the shift from that, which is what the state defines as a full return to school, to the hybrid version can only happen through one of two ways. Either the state will make a decision that all districts are either directed or allowed to now move to a hybrid model, or a district could inform the state that because of health concerns, and this would need to be done in collaboration with the local health authorities, because of health concerns, something like a local identified case or cluster, that the district would like to shift to that model and is looking for the permission, for the waiver to do so. That conversation is an open conversation right now. If you follow local Connecticut news, you will see that there are communities that are beginning to float plans that don't necessarily seem to meet 170 full days of school. The commissioner has reiterated verbally and now in writing that as of this moment in time, the expectation is 177 full days of school for all students.
Yeah.
That's been clarified for us. The conversation continues. And again, this is a bit of when I talk about a moving target, I would not be at all surprised if they're especially considering the case numbers nationally, if not here in the Northeast at this moment. But I know that there are, again, the same way that we rolled out a graduation plan and then there was feedback, the commissioner and the governor are receiving feedback from bargaining units, employees, parents, health officials. There's new information coming out. And I wouldn't be surprised if the plan for opening school doesn't shift between now and the first day of school.
And the only point I'm making is that I think we're getting a political and bureaucratic response to an educational question. And I don't think it's justified. And I think it's hamstringing what we might think about, much less everybody else. And the state eventually is going to probably be forced, maybe too late, to reconsider that. And what's the way in which we might get the state to allow far more freedom to each district to think about this? Because the very fact that there's so many staff members that might not be available, the very fact that X number of percentage of parents might not be sending kids to school, that Rubik's Cube of trying to mix appropriate instruction time with the kids in and out of school is close to impossible beforehand. And it'll end up being the first 5 weeks of school being so reactive as opposed to, in fact, engaging in the kind of things we're doing. So I'm just interested in finding out how we can have a dialogue because I just don't think that there's any education, there's no research that supports the time issue being the fixed variable against which everybody has got to do.
No, but I do want to add that what is confounding that conversation, and Dr. Hirsch, I think you know that in an ideal world, I would agree with everything that you just said. But the state is not the only entity that measures the school year in 180 days and 900 hours. Remember, we also have 6 bargaining contracts that measure the school year the same way. We've got parents, we've got a school calendar, we've got, so there's a whole ecosystem and a whole structure that is built around that understanding as well. And so I know that the state is engaged in conversations with the union at the state level. I know that the leadership groups, I know that CABE and CAPS and CAS and CEA and AFT are all part of these conversations. You could characterize the collaborative nature of those conversations in different ways on different days, but I know that those conversations are occurring. I think there will be some movement. I don't know how significant or helpful any of that movement is going to be. I need to be really honest. The design of this plan is very much reactive. We are, I've mentioned to this group over and over again, I just have Maslow's hierarchy, it just floats in front of me visually all the time. And we are sacrificing a lot of things that we usually spend, higher portions of that pyramid, where I would prefer to spend my time, because we're making concessions to how we will keep the students 3 to 6 feet apart as often as we can, how we will keep masks on during instructional time, and how we will keep students from the social interactions that we believe are one of the best things that happen during our school day. I guess the way that I am justifying this to myself is that even in the hybrid plan, even if we only got students back into school 2 days a week, and even if they only saw 1 teacher and 20 students or 10 students for those 2 days a week, that's better and richer than what we offered from March to June. And
Agreed.
And so it's definitely a step back in the right direction. But boy, when we measure that against the social and emotional experience that we provided up until March 10th of last year, it is pale in comparison. And it looks like that recently pruned tree in the backyard that makes you want to cry until you get 2 years of new growth back on that tree. And so I'm a little annoyed that my colleague came across that metaphor before I did, but it works for me, and it's what I keep in mind. We're making some really difficult decisions, limiting decisions, but at least it's a step back in the right direction if we don't get there all the way.
One thing that I think as we plan, as I listen to this, I mean, I'm almost overwhelmed with the complexity of what you're facing, particularly at the high school, which is going to be really tough. But it strikes me that we're going to have to make, well, two things strike me. One, all of this safety-oriented stuff that we're talking about is going to result in costs above what we have in the budget.
Yes,
I mean, if
undoubtedly.
Monitors on the bus, and we're going to do all this deep cleaning, and we're going to have people who are doing distance learning, and we have people who are in the classrooms teaching, and we have some people who are going to say that they can't participate because of health or other reasons, and we have to bring in a substantial number of longer term substitutes. We're going to be over budget. And as I listen to you having to make decisions at the high school, part of what those decisions is how much extra would we be willing to spend at the high school to create an environment that looks something like what we would normally have. I mean, yes, you can cut back the offerings, but you know, at some point, you know, kind of change the whole tenor of things. And it seems to me that we ought to, at some point fairly early in this process, maybe visit with some senior people at the town level and alert them to what's sort of going on here and get a feeling from them as to what kind of support they would give us.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mr. Sands. I mean, more and more, we're recognizing that every day we're dealing with a series of chicken and egg problems. We're trying to design for the opening of school, but we don't know what condition we're going to be in. Are we buying PPE for 100% opening or for a 50% opening? That's a significant cost difference. We've got principals who are trying to build schedules, but we don't know how many staff members and parents will be returning their children, how many children and students and staff members will be able to return even in a full opening. There are some positives to that. We did receive some of the CARES funding. We received about $114,000. That's a drop in the bucket, but there was CARES funds that did come to Guilford. Last week, with some of the CAPS and AASA groups, I was part of meetings with all of our Connecticut delegation members. We met with both Senator Blumenthal and Senator Murphy's office. We met with all of the reps. We will be meeting with, Rosa DeLauro is meeting with superintendents from around the state, and we're pushing hard to make sure that our representatives understand that we need for those HEROES dollars to arrive in this town and in this school district as well. Now, the Senate only has 10 days left in the session before they need to make a decision on this, but there are additional relief funds that are held up in the HEROES funding. We have further explained to all of our delegation members that if there was ever a time to fully fund IDEA, it's this year. We know that the feds have never fully funded their obligation towards special education. We know that this year we will be running into a shortfall of special education funds as we need to help the students who have been home for 4 months and may be home for part of this year. One of the things I don't know if I mentioned this at all. One of the things that we really like about the hybrid model and the Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday model is that for some of our students with the most unique needs, some of our special education students who have sort of struggled the most with distance learning, those students could have schedules that allow them to come in for all 4 days of schooling. So we will be able to create some really thoughtful exceptions for students who need more than 2 days of contact to have their learning be supported. So we're pushing for those additional funds. But again, Mr. Sands, we're trying to figure out how to design the program before we know how many of those dollars will be flowing to our community. It would have been great if the HERO funds could have been specifically identified down to the district level 2 months ago, so that we were planning based on a budget rather than planning not knowing what that financial support will be. I'll only conclude my comment to that point by adding that I do think that Dr. Balistraci and I were very clear with the Board of Finance when they did finalize our budget that we do not expect that the final budget will cover to meet our expenses, and that we do anticipate the need to come to the town for a special appropriation. And I have to say, that our Board of Finance responded responsibly. I think they responded appropriately, and they are not saying, make sure you bring it in under the existing budget. They are saying to us, do what you need to do for your students, and if you need to come back, let us know. But your point is well taken. We need to keep them very involved. And as this report comes to conclusion, again, I mentioned I want to hold the town hall on Tuesday, and I want to be able to speak to the community about this plan. But I think it makes a lot of sense for me to visit with both the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen and give them an individual heads up on what the plan is looking like in areas where we do see increased expense, like special education, like substitutes, like transportation, like custodial, and certainly in supplies and materials. And all of those are before Dr. Hirsch we get to instruction. Those were all just the logistical pieces before instruction.
But ultimately, we have to have a plan that we can justify instructionally. And on its face, it seems to me, just in common sense, the hybrid model is a far safer model. It does far more justice to the things that we have to deal with social distance. If that's the case, and we knew that we could start out with that it'd be wiser to start school with a hybrid model, eventually maybe move to full-time rather than the reverse, you could create a much richer hybrid model instructionally, if that's where we could put our energy, number one. And
you might be
two,
able to build greater confidence and trust in the people who are nervous about coming back.
And what I'm worried about is that the state level macro thinking may say you got to go back to school full, regular sessions, and we don't have the option to come up with a much better plan. And the second thing is, the town is going to it's going to face a major revenue problem. Okay, it's going to get cut, especially Guilford. And so no matter how much we go back to them for, this state has to find millions of dollars of deficit over the next
year is going to be a very difficult budget.
And where do we think that's coming from? Okay. And this town's got very little stomach for increasing the tax base locally to make up for that. So I don't have a lot of hope that money is going to come from the town, no matter how much they agree with us. I really believe that your plan.
Richard, I don't agree with that. I think that this is a limited time, unusual situation.
I hope you're right.
And the town has a fair amount, and if I believe that if we approach the town and explain what the issues are, that we will get the right kind of support. I really do.
I grant you that. Let's assume that's the case. That's good news. That doesn't solve the larger problem of what's the best way of getting kids into school safely in a way that increases parents' confidence that we're doing something that is better on its face than what they're worried about now.
Well, I'll concede that too. I'm just saying that, but I think that I think we need to be frank and upfront with the leadership of the town and keep them apprised as to, you know, this is going to cost money and we got to give them some ideas. I've looked at some reports from other districts, not in this area, that were approximately the same size as ours. And people are estimating that the additional cost is somewhere, for a district of approximately our size, somewhere in the area of $1.5 million.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Sands, we were required to put together a financial response to the state. I told them in every comment box that I was allowed that these are preliminary figures, that and again, chicken and egg problem, but we actually reported to the state more like 3.2 million. That if we see the worst case scenario for a district our size in all of these areas that I've mentioned, that we could be looking at an extent cost of $3.2 million. I have no intention of going to the Board of Finance and saying that we overspent our approved budget by $3.2 million this year. So, right, there's again, I'm sure that as we design better and as we, but it's so early to be trying to price out what any of these impacts are going to be. I'd rather be way over than be way under in my response to the state.
Mr. Sands, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, you know, Paul and I talked briefly about this earlier today. So once the school and the administration has time to finalize this initial plan, and I say that very carefully because we all know that things could change. And again, we're hearing things at the state level, different conversations that could change this plan next week, right? But that we will need to start conversations with the Board of Finance. Even if they are initial conversations, let them know that we are starting to think about things. Let them know kind of the range this could fall in. Let them know that the Board of Education, as we get closer, will be discussing things more specifically, and we'll have more firmer numbers. But to your point, bring them into that part of the conversation as soon as we can, because we are going to need them to join with us in this endeavor.
Yeah, that's my point, is that we should make sure that we don't surprise them.
Oh, no, absolutely not. And we have we as a board have an obligation. Part of our responsibility here, right, is the financial piece of all this. So this is not just a good idea. It is our responsibility to be engaging in those conversations as soon as we feel that we have some substance to provide them, or at least again give them a sense of the kind of support we think we may need, depending on X, Y, and Z.
Right, but I think the important thing that they need to understand is that the money that we're going to get from the feds and the money that we may or may not get from this HEROES thing is not going to come close to what we're going to need.
I think that's a possibility, absolutely. And I think we need to have kind of honest, authentic conversations with them, much like we will be having among ourselves.
And again, I'm just going to take this moment to throw this in. I can't say often enough or clearly enough that this plan is really just the very beginnings of a roadmap. Dr. Balistraci said the message from CABE is that flexibility is going to be, right? I guarantee that the first draft that we put out will evolve before we get to the first day of school, and then we will continue to learn and modify and grow even as we get into the school year, because not only will conditions outside the school district likely be changing as summer turns into fall, but internally we will be learning from experience and making adjustments internally and changing what happens as well. Dr. Hirsch, possibly to your point, I again want to say that We've got summer learning pathways that are occurring right now that are really beginning to look at the ways that we balance synchronous versus asynchronous contact with students. And it doesn't necessarily boil down to, it's got to be 20 minutes of synchronous contact a day. In fact, the synchronous component needs to be front loaded, and the students are then released to more independent time. And that's all done independent of any in-person contact that is built on a 2-day rotating schedule or occurring every day in the traditional schoolhouse. So we are learning from these experiences, and I can't tell you how helpful the focus groups have been that Dr. Crystal and I have conducted with parents and teachers and students over these first few weeks. We've got another one scheduled tomorrow morning that is focusing or tomorrow afternoon, that is focusing specifically on parents of students with special needs. We're talking to them. We're continuing to again, try to learn from the past experience to help project into the future, and continuing to try to balance those instructional desires that self-actualization at the top of the pyramid with the logistical demands of cohorting and social distancing and transporting kids in ways that will be safe and healthy. I'd also like to mention, and I appreciate that we have really focused on the instructional component of the plan, but I want to highlight the plan also has an entire section around transportation. We did talk a little bit about school buses. I do want to make clear again that the school buses do not mandate social distancing, but it's a value. If the encouraging parents to drive their students to school reduces the loads on the buses, then to the degree possible, we will be keeping distance between and among the students as they load the buses as much as that space is available. Again, masks will be required on school buses. Masks and hand sanitizer will be available. We'll be increasing the cleaning regimen on all the buses. There's a whole section on transportation. There's a whole section on facilities that addresses things like furniture and cleaning cycles. There's an entire section around medical screenings and what to do should a child, well, first of all, guidance and encouragement for parents to make sure that every parent is checking their child every day before sending any student to school. Any student who seems to be symptomatic, especially any student who has a fever, should not be sent to school. They should stay home. We will be looking at creating dismissal procedures and pickup procedures should students come to school and begin to feel unwell or begin to show symptoms, especially fever. There is, so again, there's instructional sections, but there are sections on facilities, for sections on transportation, there are sections on medical. There's information in there about our continued communication and relationship with the local health officials in town. And again, we will have this completed by the close of business this week, and you will receive the plan at least by the weekend so that we can discuss it in public on Monday night next week. And then again, I'll answer questions, and I believe Dr. Balistraci will be joining me to answer questions of the public on Tuesday evening through that town meeting structure.
Are we planning on having a regular regime of testing for the staff?
No, at this point, the state plan does not require, and again, we don't have a vehicle that would require us to do COVID testing of students or staff before they do enter the school. In fact, I want to make clear the plan does not require temperature screening as part of the plan. We ask that every parent check their student's temperature at home, but there has been some concern around using temperature screening as a gateway. We know that some students, we know that many in the younger age category can be positive without being symptomatic, and so that it could lend a false sense of security. But I think we've also discovered that especially earlier in the school year or late in the school year, students waiting at a hot bus stop in the morning, running around with their friends, might then step up to the bus and actually have a surface temperature reading that appears to be elevated when they're, so that is not something that the state is mandating or requiring any longer. We were in fact beginning to process purchase orders for mass temperature, mass thermal sensors that we canceled and held back on, and that was almost money that was really poorly spent on a device that would do a whole cluster of students at the front of the high school. And then we found out that that's probably unreliable and not required. So we did not expend those dollars on those purchases. At this time, the state of Connecticut is not requiring, and I don't believe has the capacity to conduct a regular schedule of COVID screening for either students or
That's the
staff.
problem. I don't see how to do it.
And I believe that's part of the national conversation, and I believe that may be part of the basis for the lawsuit that I referenced that I think was filed in Florida today around opening the schools fully in a state that's actually spiking. I do want to say, for all of the challenge that is involved in this, I believe that the governor's office and the commissioner's office in Connecticut has been really diligent. They are trying to make the best decisions they can make under really challenging circumstances. I understand that Connecticut has some of the best numbers for transmission and spread in the country, and I appreciate the value being placed on getting our kids back in school. I want to make clear that we are committed to making sure that it is done first safely, and then, to Dr. Hirsch's point, effectively, so that we're not just getting kids back for the purpose of getting them back, and we're not rushing them back in a way that is unsafe or unhealthy for any of our students or adults who are going to be in those buildings. Locally, that is a value. I believe that at the state level in Connecticut, that's a value as well. I don't know that I can say that for some of the larger conversations that I'm witnessing taking place outside of Connecticut, but I can't compliment the governor or the commissioner enough for the way that they have tried to approach this, and it's not been easy. I give them both a lot of credit for the work that they've done, for the plan that they have put out, and don't envy them the next 6 weeks. They are in as difficult a spot as we are.
Dr. Freeman, can I ask a clarification question? Whether we're talking kind of the full capacity model, which recognizes that there are students who still would not be coming into the school, parents are not comfortable or they are medically fragile, or the hybrid model, although I think you answered that question. It sounds like there may be students who are not joining their classmates in the school who might be spread across multiple classrooms, instead of perhaps being in one classroom with a teacher who might then be teaching them. And am I correct in guessing
Yes.
that's partially because we expect that group who is not coming in is not going to be a static group, that there may be some fluidity to that group, and we're going to need to be able to respond to kids at times coming or staying home for various reasons?
That's exactly right. We looked early on at the idea, especially for the full opening. And I think the best way to understand the difference between the full opening, the hybrid, and the distance learning is in the invitation. In the full opening, we will be inviting all students to return to school for full day every day. We understand that some students will not be returning because they have medical conditions or because their parents aren't comfortable. And again, that's that 10 to 35% that we think we're looking at. But we will be ready and we will facilitate every child's return. In the hybrid, we will only be inviting 50% of the population to school on any given day. A child would not be able to attend all 5 days. We would in fact be restricting their access. And then in the distance learning model, we are not allowing anybody to return to school. Originally, around the full opening and even around the full opening, we were looking to design both a virtual school and an in-person school. And the idea was, well, if we could wed the student population that can't return to the adult population that can't return, then they could be self-sustaining in this virtual academy. But that won't work because the numbers will be fluid. We cannot require that if you don't come back on day one, you can't come back for the whole school year. So the idea of creating a virtual third grade with a teacher that starts with 20 students, well, if those students begin migrating back into the school, The other 2 third grade classes that are physical actually now begin to get larger and in fact overcrowded, making the social distancing less possible for those students. And then the idea of equity between and among employees. So if the distance academy dwindles down to only 4 students, do we have somebody who's teaching 4 students virtually while 2 colleagues in school are now both maintaining class sizes of 27? That is untenable. So the idea of creating 3 in-person third grades, each scheduled at 20, recognizing that from the first day on, each of you may have 2 or 3 or 5 students at home, and you're blending your instructional approach. You're live streaming what you do in the classroom so that, and again, if you just compare that to what we offered March through June, students didn't have the opportunity to sign in and live stream to a discussion that was happening in real time in a classroom. So now the students who choose to stay home will be afforded that opportunity. And then we thought about, and now what happens if we've got the virtual school and the in-person school, and now we have to shift to a hybrid model. Now we have to go to only 50% capacity. Well, now do we tell more staff members that they're home doing the virtual component? Well, because fewer staff members are required to do the in-person component. And so now we're restarting a new school year. But in the blended learning model, it continues seamlessly. So now instead of supporting 2 or 3 kids at home, I'm always supporting 9 at home while the other 9 are here with me in school. And so it really afforded a much more fluid design. Again, I have to say over and over again, we have yet to discuss with any of our bargaining groups the impact that this has on working conditions and the expectation that that has baked into it of all of our employees. So again, when I say that this plan is not done, that's an enormous component. As much as the medical side is, we need to bring this forward. Now, we have had teachers giving feedback. They've been part of the focus groups. They responded to us about what last year's experience was like. And there are teachers who are involved in some of this design work, but they are by no means giving away every bargaining group's ability to now negotiate about the impact that this has on their labor agreements. That's an important part of what we do, and that needs to be addressed properly. And I have no doubt will have some impact on the plan at some level. I do know that there are a number of other school districts around the state that are thinking in the same direction. And it may not look exactly the same as the blended model in Guilford, but there are many school districts that are looking at it in this blended approach, not in the virtual and in-person dichotomy approach.
Great, thank you.
Paul, I realize that this is getting into more of the social emotional component, but it is something that's very important because we're going to be bringing, however we bring them back, if it's on a hybrid model or a full, how, and again, you don't have to answer this in detail yet because we're kind of working still on a macro fluid level, but how do we anticipate supporting the kids, the students in those first few weeks of transition back to an environment that's going to, I myself have 3 daughters in the school district, and they keep saying, I can't wait to get back to school because they're thinking pre-March, right? Mm-hmm. In their innocent minds, they're thinking, I just want to get back to school. I want to get back to class, my friends. Even though we explained to them that's going to look very different. But I just imagine that there's going to be a lot of emotional adjustment to this and a lot of disappointment for the students and a lot of frustration. And I'm just curious what you've hypothesized, how would that look in supporting the kids in the students in the first few weeks or month even?
Near the end of the school year, all of the principals had the opportunity to participate in some distance adult learning opportunities with the Institute for Learning. Dr. David Kirkland was one of the speakers that we heard, and he talked about the importance of needing to slow down to go quickly. We have talked with Dr. Scott Marion, who is the director of the Center for Assessment out of New Hampshire. And even in the state plan makes it very clear that you should not be giving diagnostic assessments on the first day of school. And in fact, every classroom experience needs to start with an activity or a task that has a high likelihood of success for every single student. Dr. Kirkland just talks about focusing on the joy of school before you move on to anything else. Right? We need to bring these kids back into school and recognize that they have not had a classroom experience or a face-to-face experience with their teachers since March. So whether we're doing that 5 days a week or 2 days a week, we need to start by focusing on those social components. We need to start by talking about why we're all wearing masks in school today. Things that go unnamed and unspoken about become scary. So the first thing that we need to, and we've been collecting videos from people like Bill Nye the Science Guy to local medical professionals. We've had local residents in town who happen to be dentists who are reaching out saying, I know how to wear PPE appropriately. We need to start by helping our teachers focus on doing something that every kid is going to love doing and every kid is going to be able to hit out of the park. We're not going, we were having a conversation, I was having a conversation with Principal Chaff from the high school today, saying that we need to protect ourselves from ourselves and say that there is a minimum of a 2-week blackout period on giving any student a diagnostic assessment on what they missed last year. We need to let them get back in and begin having fun and begin being successful before we start rushing to make up the minutes or the days that we may have missed at the back end of this school. As we went into distance learning, we said relationship is more important than rigor and contact is more important than content. And we need to remember that when we come back. As we look at this calendar item, that is the next item on our agenda tonight, we're looking to have 7 full days of professional time. Dr. Crystal and I talked about making sure that we've got resources that talk with our staff members about around trauma-informed instruction. The fact is, all of our students have gone through a trauma over these last several months, some greater than others, but some percentage of our students are going to be coming back with PTSD. We need to be ready to respond to that at the classroom level. I want to be clear what we will not be doing. We won't be having assemblies to teach our students about stress and anxiety. Or, right, one, we can't put them in a large group like that. We can't put 100 or 200 kids in an auditorium together. But it also needs to become the way we will do schooling, not something, and again, and with our teaching staff, we're not going to put them through a 1-day training on trauma-informed instruction and check a box and tell the state that we fixed that. That's not the way it works, but it is going to have to be paramount in our minds this year as we come back. This is going to be another unusual year, right? And we're probably not going to deal with 4 months of disruption like we did last year. We're probably going to deal with 8 or 10 months of disruption this year across a whole school year. How will we talk about that? How will we think about assessing students, grading students, supporting students, and keeping them emotionally healthy and safe while we also, we do care about their learning. We do want to make sure that there's learning going on, but we want to make sure that they're emotionally safe and healthy as well while we're doing that.
And the thing, I'm sure all of the administrators on this call and in the system are well aware, the start of any school year comes with its own anxieties. We have kids entering the high school for the first time. We have kids entering Adams for the first time, right? Kids entering, for some kids, these transitions in a normal school year are really challenging and anxiety producing. So it's just, kudos to all of you, in our system who are really going to be addressing all of these things and have to do it so very carefully.
And there's a lot of good work being done at the state. I know that Dr. Mark Brackett out of Yale has been offering a lot of his materials and supports to teachers and administrators around the state. There is a lot of good work that is being done, and we are going to need to make sure that we're finding ways to leverage that work, take advantage of the resources that we have, and pay attention to that. We're not opening the schools in a way that is ideal for social emotional wellness because we're prioritizing the transmission of the virus. Students are going to meet their teachers for the first time wearing a mask. That's not the best way to meet somebody. And so, we're going again, we're removing some of the things in school I mean, I was never a big fan of passing time, but I know that an 8th grader appreciates passing time. They appreciate seeing somebody in the hallway. We intentionally for forever made sure that at the middle school, the group that has English together isn't the same group that has social studies together, even though they're in the same team of 100 students. That social mixing and remixing was important. We're compromising that this year. We know that we're letting that social mixing and remixing go because we're letting it go in favor of cohorting. We're letting a social and emotional positive go because we need to take away a possible exposure to a virus transmission. So just know that as we make those compromises, we're doing it with our eyes open, we're doing it knowingly, and then we're trying to think about how do we then mitigate, and again, I know this is probably a rationalization, but I'm telling myself that, again, it's better than what we were offering them in March, April, May, and June. At least they're getting in and seeing these classmates. At least they're coming in 2 days a week, if not 5 days a week. It's at least getting back to better, if not all the way back to better immediately.
I have a comment. I appreciate all your thoughtfulness around the social emotional issues. I appreciate your comments about not jumping right into these assessments. But what's behind that, initially is that the concern, right? Where are these students? The kids who are going into 6th grade, the kids going into 7th grade, do they have the skills that we expect, that they would have, as we would expect any other year? And so, but that's a really difficult thing for you to balance. And it really strikes me that that some kids benefited differentially from distance learning. Even kids who were smart and academically inclined may have fallen off a cliff during distance learning for lots of different reasons. And I'm wondering if there's, if you're thinking about, or that you're on top of, there's a way that teams from the previous year can communicate with teams from the new year about students that they're concerned about. Students who may, that they were aware were good students, but, through distance learning, they didn't see them, they didn't turn in assignments, or they just had personal concerns, and whether somehow that could be communicated to the next grade level, just so that the teachers can keep a heads up on individual students that may have some of these issues that need to be addressed.
It's one of those priorities that we'll be fighting for some of that time on those 7 days. Will we be able to find opportunities? And quite honestly, one of the positives that we are experiencing from this is that we're realizing that Zoom can be a tool for us even when we reopen our schools. So I know that we've talked to you in the past about the challenges we've had about getting specials teachers from the elementary schools together. One of the problems in our neighborhood model is that there's only one music teacher at each of the elementary schools, only one PE teacher, and only a part-time art teacher at each. It's difficult for those people to work collaboratively because we can't get them together during a work day. Well, we've just realized that Zoom actually allows us to do that. If we can find them opportunities across the school day or across a week where they're all available at the same time, they don't have to drive to a centralized location. They can just have a Zoom meeting and begin collaborating. We've struggled in the same way at the beginning of every school year around transition. How do we get the 6th grade teachers from Baldwin to spend time with the 7th grade teachers from Adams in those first precious 2.5 days before the students return to have these kinds of conversations? Well, Zoom would make that a lot easier. And now with extended time, we need to have the principals work on, can they create those opportunities so that you are handing off your class from last year and highlighting the students exactly right who really struggled in these last 4 months, who were challenged for any number of reasons. I don't have an answer yet, but yes, it's one of the things on the list that we're worrying about.
Any other questions, comments, thoughts on this reopening plan at the moment?
Dr. Balistrisi, just some quick logistical questions regarding the hybrid model specifically. Would there be any cohorting done? Will there be any cohorting done based on the bus routes and classrooms? For instance, is there any thought being given to students being with people that they live next to, that they're going to be on the bus with anyways?
Yes, and we can't figure out a way to make that work, right? So the only way to make that work would be if we created a school that was full of multi-age classrooms and we had lots of one-room schoolhouses all clustered together, because the students haven't moved into cul-de-sacs by age, right? And it's really interesting. At a different time in my career, we were redesigning a school and we were moving into multi-age settings. And one of the things that I was constantly saying as we were trying to get this community to as we were talking about multi-age, school is the only place in your life where you are cohorted by the year in which you were born. It doesn't happen anywhere. The closest analog would be youth sports leagues, but even they do multiple years at a time. There's always the rookies and the veterans on the team. You don't work with people in your office who are all the same age as you. All of us on this Zoom call were not born in the same year. So no, and it's one of the reasons that the state is encouraging us to encourage parents. So basically what it comes down to is every student will be exposed to 2 cohorts every day, the one on the school bus and then the one in school. And we will try to limit it to just those 2 cohorts. Again, if there was an exposure, it would make tracing much easier because you're only working with those 2 cohorts. A parent who chooses to drive their child to school reduces that exposure from 2 cohorts a day to 1 cohort a day. And additionally, every parent who makes that choice creates more space on the bus for the students who do continue riding the bus to spread out. And so while you are still in a second cohort, you'll be getting more social distancing as a benefit for every child who isn't on that bus. But I don't know any district that's figured out a way to tie. I mean, we've started having conversations about after school activities all taking place virtually only, so that if you're on the bus in the morning and then you're in a classroom cohort and then you want to join the school newspaper or the yearbook club or the Dungeons and Dragons club or does that now become a 3rd cohort, or do we tell only students from this group can join the newspaper? We can't do that. So we're looking at whether or not we can turn all those club activities into virtual, so that way you do have a 3rd exposure, but it's not a physical exposure. That way the clubs are only meeting virtually. Sports continues to be a big item on that list. The CIAC is continuing to look into athletics, and at the high school where cohorting is less rigid, will we continue to have sports opportunities, athletic opportunities next year? There's a real question about whether we will continue to have a full offering of athletic opportunities at Adams, where we are creating cohorting, and we would violate that cohorting by offering athletic opportunities. That's less true at the high school because of the nature of the high school and the difficulty in cohorting at all. So we've thought a lot about it, and I haven't met anybody who's figured it out, John.
And when we're talking about the hybrid model with families that have multiple students, will there be thought given to having those kids on the same cycle?
Yes, absolutely. We will make every attempt to make sure that siblings in multiple schools are on the same cycle, so that you don't have 2 of your kids in school on Monday and Tuesday and 2 other ones on Thursday and Friday. We will do everything to make sure that siblings are on the same cycle, so a family knows the kids are both, they're all out on Thursday and Friday, but they're all home Monday through Wednesday. That's a great question. Thank you for asking it.
Mm-hmm.
That's built into the plan.
Paul, with the CIAC, when do you think we'll have a better sense of what they're recommending? Because I know some of the teams are already trying to, do captains workouts together and things like that. And,
Right.
a soccer team versus a volleyball team, right? Because volleyball's indoors, touching the same ball versus, so when do they think they'll have more?
Right
Correct.
now, the intention is to have some reduced athletic season. But I know again, it's the same way that right now we expect to be doing a full opening. That is the current plan. The CIAC has a plan. I believe that we've linked to it on our website. There are mitigation strategies built into that. The season, I believe, is going to be a little truncated. I believe that we will only be competing against schools that are more geographically centered around us, so that there's less travel across the state into other regions of the state. But at this point, the plan is to have an athletic season, again, at least at the high school level. That's an open question at the middle school level, where we also have, I mean, many of our students are engaged in summer athletic programs that are going on right now. And so there's definitely this sort of tension between all the kids are coming back and we're working on cohorting, and athletics would violate that, but students are involved in athletics in Connecticut right now. And so there is a plan now. The plan is for a modified athletic season. I know that our coaches have been sending out individual workout plans to our fall athletes so that they are conditioning over the fall. We are not hosting coaching team settings at all, but I do know that athletes are getting together individually. I look out my window to the green and I see students who are getting together to meet for runs. And part of me, you know, as long as they're staying a few feet apart, I think that's a great opportunity for students to have some kind of modified social experience. If you're staying 6 feet apart and if you're running outdoors, I'm thrilled that I see kids that are getting together on the green and going out for a run. We should not be encouraging or putting our athletes in situations where they are violating social distancing or they are not being safe in order to get ready for this athletic season. And like everything else, I need to put an asterisk after it because I think it is likely that there will be modifications or changes to the season that is ahead of us. You guys keep moving on my screen. I'm looking at you and I'm talking, and then you just jumped over to the other side. We'll keep working on it. That's the best I have for now. The best answer I can give to our community tonight is to go to our website or to the CIAC website and look at the plan for the fall season. That's the best thing that you can do right now.
Any other thoughts, questions for Dr. Freeman at this point?
We do have another agenda item. Which
We
is,
do,
of course,
yeah. So I just want to take a moment and then move on to that agenda item, right? So again, as Dr. Freeman has noted, the administration needs to submit by this Friday to the State Department of Education a draft of the plan. The state does not have to approve our plan. They simply need to receive it. It is my understanding, or at least what's been communicated by CABE, is it gives the state a chance to understand what districts are doing or what they're planning to do at this point across the state. As I think we've already noticed several times in this conversation already, we expect that that plan will change to some degree. It may change because we make changes to it. It may change because the state tells us that we need to make changes to it. It may change because the disease transmission in Connecticut changes. So, and then the last thing I want to say, and then move on to the next agenda item, as I kind of referred to before, once we start talking details of this plan and start talking details in terms of budgetary implications, our role increases in really thinking about what that means. And that's when we start making considerations about how and when we go to the Board of Finance to start talking that level of detail. All right. So we do have another agenda item, 2020-21 school calendar update. Dr. Freeman, you have an updated calendar for us to consider.
Yes, and I apologize for doing this twice. We could have done this once if I had seen this coming. So recently, I asked you to look at the calendar and to cluster 4 of the 5 professional development days that we have in our calendar annually at the front end of the school year and delay the opening of school. Shortly after we made that change, the State Department of Education then approved a reduction in the student contact days of this coming school year, 2021, from 180 to 177, assuming or considering that those 3 reduced days be rolled into teacher preparation, training, and planning for a safe return to school. It's a little bit to Dr. Hirsch's comment, although not nearly the magnitude that he was discussing. What I would propose to you is that along the same vein, we take this opportunity that the state is affording us, we reduce the student contact days from 180 to 177, and we again follow the model of front-loading teacher preparation and learning time. So the proposal then would be, rather than having staff return on September 1st for 4 days of training, we would have the staff return on August 31st. That would allow the staff to have an entire week of adult time only from August 31st to September 4th, leading into the long Labor Day weekend. Staff would then get a long weekend. Staff would return on September 8th and 9th after Labor Day for 2 more days of professional learning opportunity and preparation for their students. And students would in fact only return to school on September 10th. This will be the latest return to school for the student body that we have ever proposed. Now, the last day of school as a result of this doesn't get pushed later. It actually moves earlier 1 day in June, because remember, there's 3 fewer student days. So instead of the last day now being June 17th, the last student day in fact becomes June 16th. It recognizes the uniqueness of this coming year. To the point that we've been discussing over and over and over again, in those 7 days, remember, we will be building into those 7 days technology training, SEL, and possibly trauma-informed instruction learning. We will be talking about the instructional model of how do you support students who are with you in the classroom while some students are not with you in the classroom. We will be talking about assessment and the balance between the need to give those diagnostic assessments, or rather to move directly into instruction. And really importantly, we're going to be talking about the social justice and racial issues, the issues around systemic racism that we were talking about a few weeks ago here in Guilford. Those items are not going away. So 7 days won't be nearly enough, but it's an opportunity that we've never had before. The time will be balanced between some individual teacher time to simply be doing their own preparation, small team time that they can spend together collaborating with department colleagues or teammates or grade level colleagues, as well as some district work where we will be doing things at a large district scale. We have already begun to schedule some of these opportunities in, and we've got a lot of work yet to do around what teachers most need and most want during those days. There will be a balance between teacher time, principal time, and Dr. Crystal time spread across those 7 days at the beginning of the year. We'll be focusing on equity and justice. We'll be focusing on social emotional wellness. We'll be focusing on instruction and standards, as well as supports around the technologies that teachers are going to need to be safe, as well as all the schedule changes and passing time changes and what it means for us as adults to be coming into a work setting where we wear masks all day long. Teachers aren't trained in that, and so there will be time around the adult social emotional wellness and team building that has to happen in that time as well. So I've given you a copy of both the calendar as it stands today with the September 1 start and the June 17th end. And then we've given you a revised calendar with the August 31st start for staff, first day of school of September 10th for students, and a last day of June 16th. And I would be happy to answer any questions, but also ask that you approve these changes so we can push these out to the community as quickly as possible.
Paul, do we have the option of going beyond June 16th? Could we add days to our year if we chose, for example, to not use a day during the year because circumstances, or is that a drop dead date?
No, thank you for the, no, I totally understand the question now. No, we could of course push out that final date. If, for instance, we ended up experiencing I mean, I want to say snow days, but I think snow days have gone away. I don't think we're going to have snow days anymore. But let's say that we have power outages in Guilford and we are unable to provide electricity or communications or heat in the school over the winter. And we're not able to do distance learning because nobody in Guilford has power. We would not have school on that day, and we would be back on June 17th to make that day up. Let's say that in Guilford, we began to have COVID spread and we had a short closing of schools for 5 days. You could tack days onto the end of the calendar all the way up to June 30th and make up any days that are missed. What we can't do, again, partially because of the state and partially because of labor laws, is we couldn't add days on that aren't makeup. We couldn't extend the student days beyond, right? We've got most of our contracts have a total of 185 days based on 180 student days and 50 adult learning days. Now we still have the total 185, but it's with 177 and 7 adult days. You couldn't add on to that and change the gross without incurring cost in negotiating the impact. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Any other questions about the calendar before we vote on this new proposed calendar? All right, so I am going to entertain a motion regarding the calendar.
So moved.
Dr. Hirsch, that's a motion to approve the revised calendar.
Yes.
All right, and I'm seeing Mrs. Sullivan raising her hand. That's a second. All right. Any other comments, questions? All right, all in favor? Aye. Okay. Any noes? And any abstentions? Okay. So it looks like there are 7 of us present, and that's 7 in favor of the revised calendar. All right.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so again, we will, for the viewing public, we will have another meeting next Monday evening. Is that correct? We'll be hearing about the plan. Sorry, for a second, I was getting a blank stare and I thought, oh my gosh, terrific. So we will be having a meeting next Monday evening. At that time, Dr. Freeman will be able to provide the Board of Education and the viewing public a more detailed look at the plan that was submitted on Friday. I imagine Board of Ed members, I know as I keep digging into this information and hearing more, think of questions as I go along. So I imagine if people have a lot of questions and Dr. Freeman, I know that you and the administration is going to be working hard. Is it better to streamline those questions or gather them together, or do you mind receiving them over the course of the next week?
No, at this point, I'm totally happy having board members email me directly with specific questions. I'm also receiving questions from community members. And again, I would just remind the community members that the plan will be available not physically, the plan will be available electronically as early as Monday of next week. And I will be happy to answer questions at the town hall that we will be arranging and advertising on Tuesday. I will make every effort to respond to every question that I receive by email. I want to acknowledge publicly that I think I've gotten to the point that I have missed a few because there are a lot of questions that are coming in. And I try to respond to every single one, but if I've missed a response to an email from a community member, please just send it again. And again, please look at the plan when we release it, and please join us on Tuesday night where we can have more opportunity to answer those questions individually. Last week, following this board meeting, we also blasted out the link to last week's conversation, and I think that was really helpful. So we may do something very similar tomorrow morning. People are going to start to hear that we talked about the plan last night, and I think if people can go back and view this meeting, that it would be very helpful. Archiving the meetings has been a benefit of the Zoom platform.
All right, terrific. So that being said, we have gotten through the meeting's agenda. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved, Ms. Sullivan. I see Mary Beth second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Good night, everyone. I really want to thank Dr. Freeman and the administration and everyone within the school system that is just working so incredibly hard to really craft plans that meet all of the needs that we've discussed tonight. So thank you. And we look forward to hearing more next week.
Well, and I just want to thank all of you for listening to me talk for 2 hours straight without taking a breath. And for those of you on the policy committee, it was 3 hours straight. And I really do appreciate that. I wish there was another way to get all this information out. And if I could think of it, I would certainly offer it. But thank you very much. There's a lot to digest, and I appreciate all of your thoughtful questions and all of your patience in digesting it.
Thank you.
All right. All right.
Thanks,
Thank
Bob.
you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.